This will be the final boss of my abstract paintings. I don't know when I did. I forgot when I did this. It was I was modeled after barbecue. Man, watching the Sutton deal, kind of like me versus Red. It's actually Red parodying me. But what's funny about the whole thing is it reminds me of like some topic I want to do called folk art and alcoholism. And it says alcoholics are kind of like dwell in the past, and you can think about all these memories and whatnot, about how things are evolving over the years. You get mired in your past. It's kind of like your past dictates this it keeps you purposely frozen. I can tell you, getting older and stuff like that. That's something I say over and over to all my buddies. I said, especially when you hit about 50 plus, 45 plus, you got to find things that captivate you, hold your attention. Because eventually you run out of things that hold your attention. You just kind of wander around aimlessly. I kind of saw that with my folks as they kind of got into their 70s and 80s. But I can imagine that, I don't know what it is, maybe some brain chemistry or brain behavior, or just having a good attitude, If you don't use it, you lose it. That's always something I always say. I read this is some of that professor shit I've been talking about, He always makes fun of me about trying to intellectualize things, It's kind of funny. I was remembering this one story from way back on the drive back over here. It was about one of my old buddies back in high school. And this big influence that this had on me in some degree. Back in high school, my whole life, it really wasn't like, I did paintings and stuff at my senior year. But most of the time we sat around and played board games and argued all the time about religion and philosophy, whether God existed, that kind of stuff. All my good buddies were like Christian Baptist characters, and some Pentecostal. Then I had my party animal friends, but one of my friends, he went totally bonkers for a while, and went Pentecostal, and started trying to evangelize to us to save us. And well, my other friends would just totally go after him, thinking that he wasn't smart. Like we were all teens and stuff. We weren't allowed to talk about Christian or religious topics because we weren't adults. And so if you try to even think you were smart enough to talk about religious stuff, my other friend would sit there and get mad and try to haze on you and beat you up and stuff like that. Like, you're trying to be an adult? That's what, grown-ups talk about, You don't know nothing. You're just a dumbass, And I just remember these kind of like weird moments back in high school, but, I brought all that crap up, but, out of high school, I was a psych major for about a good 5 years, and painting and stuff like that. That was something that, I was dread. I didn't know what the hell to do that. And I used to tell people that, my folks and whatnot, telling your folks you were like want to be an artist type was like saying you want to be a ballerina. I mean, that's about how the plausibility of realistic career out of the whole mess, But it went until I got around like the hill country, started hanging out over there at Southwest, that I kind of like changed my perspective on things. I said I'd rather be a sort of brave it on your own and do carpentry and whatnot versus being a bureaucrat or an advanced babysitter. Because when I was in the psych department, I volunteered a couple times at some clinics or some houses around the area, and I was like, God, hell no. I'm like, I guess the topic is folk art and alcoholism. Maybe. It's just sort of a historical reflection as to why we would do stuff. And at some degree, these Slaughton catalogs and all the kind of history that like me and maybe like Red and Andy, we sort of liked. It's kind of like a punk rock cult of personality history. If anything, that's what I would tell people this. And then in essence, when I had to blab about folky shit and outsider stuff, But I used it, And also one thing that I know back in 95 and 96, after I graduated from Southwest Texas and with a painting degree, I said I'd rather be a concentrated of a folk character, a flat, almost stereotypical personification of my rearings and likings and stuff, and someone who's just pandering towards academia, which is something I just didn't really care for too much. I feel that was a big ass trick. I'd rather just if you're making work, you're going to be making it. It's going to find its places in all sorts of areas. And I'd say, well, why not have that be existing? I always just say to myself, if a painting existed and they looked at it and it was something so weird like that whole thing with that Mary painting, the fact is that someone actually made it. That was always something. Someone actually took the time to make that.